Fulfill Radio, a voice you can trust. Broadcasting live presents Two Guys and a Bible with Don Preston and William Bell. Join us each week at 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central as we bring you exciting, sound, challenging, and comforting messages regarding the end times. Thank you for tuning in today. Don Preston is the founder of Preterist Research Institute, or PRI. Don is a prolific author, having written and published 19 books, a host of audio and DVD studies, and is a debater and defender of the full preterist view. His websites are BibleProphecy.com, Eschatology.org, and DonKPreston.com. William Bell is the founder of AllThingsFulfilled.com Ministries and has a website bearing the same name, and has authored 3 books, audios, and DVDs. He has published hundreds of articles and recordings. And now, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Two Guys and a Bible broadcast with Don Preston and William Bell. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is William Bell. Welcome to Two Guys and a Bible, right here on Fulfill Radio, a voice you can trust. I hope that you can hear me. Don, are you able to hear okay?
I am, William. You're coming in very nicely.
All right, very good, very good. Ladies and gentlemen, it's me again. I apologize. I was so spaced out, had no idea what was going on today. My wife's at home, and so I've been distracted. At any rate, we're here, and we're delighted to be here. Don, how are you doing? What's going on? And again, my apologies for being late. Thanks for that phone call, by the way, because I never would have thought about it.
Well, everything's going just really, really well. I'm very, very excited. My new book, The Death of Adam and the Life of Christ, is finally released. It's published, printed, and released. And, of course, as you know, you wrote a foreword for the book. For that, I'm very, very thankful. And I'll be sending you a copy of your copy of it tomorrow. But anyway, very, very glad to finally see that in publication, because I've had so many problems getting it published through my normal publisher, just one issue right after another. They recently, early last year, I suppose it was, they merged with another company. And ever since then, there has been one technical issue after another. I would submit the manuscript, just like I always had, with no issues. And all of a sudden, they would come back and say, well, it's not publishable in its current form. You have the following problems. And I would go into my manuscript, and I would look up the pages where they said there was a problem. And I couldn't find the problem. I would contact them back and say, I do not find the problem that you're talking about. Tell me what you're seeing. And on and on and on, I had to submit the manuscript no less than 7 times, William, before it finally got approved by them. And so even though there's one little glitch in it, I decided to go ahead and publish it. And at a future time, I will correct that because it's not a glaring issue at all. It's not anything that detracts. It's not anything with the content. It's strictly appearance. And so, like I said, I mean, it's just, it's been really, really frustrating trying to get this book published. But all that aside, it is published, and I announced it yesterday. I'm thrilled with the response that it has gotten so far. I'm getting orders from people already who are ordering multiple copies, and for that we're just extremely thankful. Now, of course, the book has been available on Kindle for a couple of months, but I just announced the paperback version yesterday, and again, the response has been very, very good, and we appreciate that so very, very much. So I want to let everyone know that book is available. It's on my website. And the normal price of the book will be $19.95 plus $4.95 shipping. But for the rest of September and for all of October, special introductory price of $17.95 post-paid. That's total delivered price. So you're going to save a good little bit amount of money if you order it now. And like I said, there's a banner on my website, donkpreston.com, bibleprophecy.com, and all you have to do is click on it, and you can order it through the website. So please take advantage of that. I've already had to order another round of books. My first order has been selling so well that I've had to place another order for another round of them. So, like I said, I'm very, very pleased with the response to the book so far.
Well, that sounds very good. I know you're glad to get that one out of the way. It makes room for another one, and we were looking forward to those pretty soon. But I understand some of the frustration you had trying to get that manuscript submitted, and so to be able to have it there, that's great. I'm definitely looking forward to my copy. It was a great read, and it certainly will be a great resource tool for many who will be studying that particular topic, and it's going to shed a lot of light on it and on some of the different views that are out there. So very good. That's great.
It's interesting that on Facebook, I've had some of our adversaries and opponents on there who obviously don't even have the paperback. Now, it's possible they've got the Kindle, but one individual that you and I have been corresponding with a good little bit over the last few weeks, a man who doesn't have the integrity to even give his real name. But anyway, he posted on there yesterday morning. He said, "This new book of yours is nothing but garbage." And I couldn't help myself. I posted in response, and I said, "Coming from you, I'll take that as a compliment." I couldn't help myself. It was just, someone who, as you well know, this guy, you can't even figure out really what he's saying. He'll take one position when arguing with someone else, and then he'll take another position when arguing with William or me. And William and I have corresponded back and forth and said, what does this guy even believe? He claims to be a full preterist, and on the other hand, he makes comments that let you know he can't be a preterist. Absolutely cannot be a preterist and hold to the positions that he espouses. And so it's absolutely amazing that you have somebody on there, and when we challenge him to have the courage and the integrity to reveal his true identity, he calls us the cowards. He calls us the ones without integrity. So it shows you what kind of an individual that we're dealing with. But all of that aside, the response to the book has truly been excellent, and I'm really, really appreciative of it.
Well, that's good. I know that, we've talked with that individual several times trying to figure out what he's trying to say. Other people have said the same thing. And so, when you got that many people asking, what are you saying, then that's time to look back at your own communication and see what's happening with that. But once again, go ahead.
I know I was just starting to say that when you have some people on there who normally bend over backwards to be accommodating to anyone and everyone, and they are far more accommodating than you or I are. After so long of nonsense, you reach a point where there's really not much sense in communicating much, except to be able to demonstrate to people the fallacy of what's being said. But these particular individuals, one particular individual, a wonderful lady from Australia, she's a fantastic Bible student. But she is posted on there. What are you saying? What you're saying makes no sense. And trying to figure out what this guy is saying, because as we were mentioning, he'll say one thing when communicating with someone else, and then he'll turn right around and say something diametrically opposite of that when arguing with us. And so there's an obvious lack of integrity on the part of this individual.
Yeah, and as you said, claiming to be a preterist, you're still looking for some signs of what brand of preterism it is that he's advocating. So maybe that will eventually come out at some point in time.
Yeah, I think so. So what's going on in your world, William?
Well, not much. I mean, I've been a little busy today for the most part. Working on TV, videos, et cetera, trying to get those done. I had some challenges, and I've been having challenges with the camera for a little bit, and finally got one of them to work enough to get, a video recorded, but I still want to get a little bit of, ahead on that project. It's kind of challenging to be able to do that and get all that done. As a matter of fact, I went to I didn't go. I actually called one of the local colleges. I said, I think it's time for me to try to find a videographer because this is getting to be too much for me. So I was hoping to find maybe a student or someone, who'd like to just make a little, extra book money or lunch money or something like that and help out and gain some experience in the process.
Yes. Well, I'm like you. I've been trying to get some filming done ahead of time for the Now TV. I made one video this morning for next month, and the 11th, I think it is. So I filmed up just a tiny bit ahead, but I still don't feel comfortable even with that almost a month of videos filmed ahead because something can always happen. And so I've been trying to get some stuff done, trying to get everything ahead, so that I can have that little bit of cushion, a little bit of leeway. And it is trying. It's very, very difficult to stay ahead of the curve, so to speak, because it's such a constant press, a constant demand on time to get the videos done. But anyway. It's great to have this opportunity to be on TV. And folks, if you're not aware of the fact, William has a TV program on Saturday evenings. William, you'll have to tell us the times a little more accurately because for some reason or other I'm having a difficult time of that. My program is on 9 o'clock Central Time, 10 o'clock Eastern on Friday mornings. And so you can catch both William and me on the Now TV network. And Alan Morton has been posting links to where you can watch both William and me on the Now TV network. You can watch our videos. And so we really, really appreciate Alan's work in doing that, making those available because an awful lot of the programming is actually overseas. And so it makes it a little bit more difficult. Now, there are a lot of stations here in the United States that are carrying it, but at the moment, it's not in all 50 states. And so you can just be watching for that. But, William, share with us what time that you're on Saturday evening.
Okay, our time is 6:30 to 7 p.m. Central Time. That's 7:30 to 8 p.m. Eastern Time. And that's every Saturday evening. So we hope that you'll tune in and send us any feedback that you feel that might be of interest and help when you can. But we certainly appreciate everybody watching. But it's it's an exciting opportunity, and I'm really grateful to be a part of it.
Amen to that. Amen to that. Well, we are continuing our study of the Messianic Temple, and last week we spent some time going back over some of the territory that we covered before by way of refreshment. But we're in Isaiah chapter 62. And as we took notice last week, the term temple does not appear in Isaiah chapter 62. But the motifs that are directly related to it are found there over and over again. And those motifs are the way, the relationship between God and Israel. And these are absolutely inextricably bound up with the Messianic temple motif. And God made the promise. And let's not forget that the promise of Yahweh in Isaiah chapter 62, that he would remarry Israel, is contemporary with the book of Hosea. In the book of Hosea, Yahweh divorced Israel, the 10 northern tribes. But he promised that in the last days, he would remarry her, But in the meantime, Israel would be for many days without temple, without altar, without priesthood, without ephod. In other words, without a temple. But in the last days, she would return to her God and serve David, her king. Now, we shared a little bit last week that these motifs of remarriage and temple are found right here. Hosea chapter 2, 21 to 23, I will betroth you again to me in righteousness. It would be the time of the new covenant, Hosea chapter 2 and verse 18. Hosea chapter 3 and verse 5, it would be in the last days. And it would be in those last days that the ephod, an altar, a temple, a priesthood would be restored to Israel. So our point here is to share with you that although temple is not mentioned in Isaiah 62, the concept of the wedding is, and the concept of the remarriage of Yahweh with Israel is absolutely tied up with temple. And I don't know how to overemphasize it. I just don't know if it's possible to overemphasize these concepts and the interrelatedness of all of these concepts in Hebraic thinking. So in Isaiah chapter 62, oh yeah, go ahead.
Let me throw in another couple of concepts here between Isaiah and Hosea. Of course, he tells them in verse 10 to go through the gates. So that would be indicative of the heavenly city as well as, the temple city from that perspective. But in Hosea 2, the text that you quoted, you also have the concept of the sowing and rising of Israel in that time, because he says, I'm going to sow her for myself in the earth. And that's the time in which he shows mercy as well. So whenever you find the showing of mercy, you find the time of the sowing, which is the resurrection concept. So all of that's tied right there into this temple typology that we have in Isaiah.
Oh, absolutely. And let's go back to that concept of I will sow her in the earth, because that's the concept of being in the dust. That's the concept of being dead and buried, but being raised again and remarried is the concept of resurrection. And you find this concept. In fact, folks, William is currently working on a book on the resurrection. And it's going to be a PowerPoint book from what I understand. And he sent me a chart that he'd been working on. And I told William, and I'll say it here, it is without a doubt one of the finest, most impressive, most powerful, and most persuasive demonstrations of these concepts of sowing, being sown in the earth, and the promise of resurrection life as it relates to Christ and the new covenant and all of these related to concepts. Without a doubt, it is the best chart that I have ever seen. And, I'm a chart guy. I love charts. I love my PowerPoints. But this chart is without a doubt the best chart that I've ever seen. I opened it back up. Must have been Sunday night. I've had lots and lots of trouble with my internet, and particularly my email. My email server was completely, totally down for 3 days. I mean, I couldn't log in. I couldn't do it remotely. I couldn't do it directly. I just simply couldn't get on. I had to spend over an hour on the tech support line of my email server before they ever got it figured out, and it's still given me some problems even since then. So, and which means, by the way, folks, if you've tried to email me over the last several days, and if I haven't responded, then there may be a very good reason for it. I tried to send my own wife a couple of emails yesterday. I sent them 3 times, and she never got them. So I don't know what in the world's going on, but I'm not real pleased with it. I do know that. But all of that aside, you see, William had sent me that chart, and I opened it back up, and I was going back over it, and I tell you, it is absolutely fantastic. It's once a person sees the connections that William is making, the parallels. And, I mean, he's got, let me see, it's 4 columns, correct, William? 3 or 4?
Yeah, it may be 5.
Well, it may be 5 by now. But anyway, once you see those parallels, you're just simply going, holy cow, that is absolutely incredible. So, I mean, it's wonderful stuff. It really is. All of these motifs that we are discussing with you here, what William just brought up about the sowing in the earth, goes back to, and it is directly related to 1 Corinthians chapter 15. What you sow is not what you reap, but God gives in the body as it pleases him. And so and by the way, let's not forget that 1 Corinthians chapter 15 is a book that begins with an allusion to Hosea, and it closes with an inclusion of Hosea, which means that Paul is using an inclusio. That's the fancy term for it. And what that means is that everything in 1 Corinthians 15, in the mind of Paul, as the divine writer, speaking, using the inclusio, is drawn from the book of Hosea. Obviously Isaiah, obviously Daniel as well. But he lets us know right up front that Hosea is the real source. And so when Hosea speaks that the Lord would sow Israel in the earth so that there would be a harvest, and that there would be a harvest both of Israel and of Judah, and then Paul is talking about the sowing and the reaping. That's not by accident, and it's not just coincidence. Paul is following the pattern, and that pattern is absolutely incredible. So, William, you can develop that if you wish, but I just wanted to kind of put that bug in everyone's ears about the work that you're doing right now on this motif of sowing and resurrection, and all of these parallels between these Old Testament motifs and their development in the New Testament.
Well, I'll just say one little additional point, and it's a huge point, really, when you think about it. But what it does is, in addition to showing the solidarity between the Old Covenant and the New, and the theme that you just mentioned in terms of the inclusio, et cetera, it also clearly demonstrates both the nature and the time of the resurrection. And so when people really get that, and I remember just throwing it out there and didn't get any response from anybody in terms of, anything that looked like a refutation of it. But it's so powerful, and at the same time so simple once you see it, in picture form, like in the chart as you were mentioning. It's just incredible. And I remember when I first started, getting that concept in front of me, and I said, wow, this is fantastic. So I think it'll be hopefully a good tool to help people see very quickly and at the same time very, profoundly what the writer is discussing.
Well, I feel the same way about it. I know when I saw it for the very first time, I just sat there and I was like, this is just dynamic. This is extremely powerful. And this will be very, very persuasive to people who have open minds and who are good analytical thinkers. Because that's what it will take, folks. I mean, you're certainly not going to just glance at it. Sharp people, good Bible students will. I'll guarantee you, they will take one look at this and go, just like I did. And that's not saying I'm sharp, but I'm just simply saying that people who are attuned to a lot of these thoughts are going to look at it and go, oh my goodness gracious. So, folks, there's something for you to be looking forward to from William Bell in who knows when, but hopefully it won't be too terribly long.
You got that right.
Do you mean the part about who knows when?
That's correct. But I mean, I'm close to being done. I'm just adding things now. to enhance it, round it out in terms of the overall project that I'm working on.
All right. Well, back to Isaiah chapter 62. Here, the Lord made the promise, and one more time, very quickly. The promise of the remarriage is the promise of the new covenant. The promise of the remarriage is also the time of the new covenant temple. And so here in Isaiah chapter 62, the Lord says, "You shall be no longer termed forsaken, neither shall your land anymore be termed desolate, but you shall be called Hephzibah, and the land Beulah, for the Lord delights in you, and the land shall be married." Now, this, of course, raises a really, really interesting concept. How can dirt be married? There is something here that is overtly covenantal that cannot be ignored. And it's extremely difficult to turn it into a woodenly literalistic concept of dirt being married. Dirt cannot be married. Only people can have that covenant relationship. Now, make no mistake, when Israel would sin and when Israel would violate the land, they would forfeit the land. That's found throughout the book of Deuteronomy and Leviticus, chapter 26 particularly. Their possession of the land was dependent upon their covenant observation and observance and obedience. So here is the Lord speaking in terms that are a little bit difficult for us today to tap into because we don't think in covenant terms as much as and like the ancient Hebrews did. Your land shall be married. Well, as far as Israel was concerned, and I believe it's W.D. Davies in his book, The Gospel and the Land, points out that in Hebraic thought, Israel was the land and the land was Israel. There was such an unbreakable bond between Israel and the land that you could not think of Israel without the land. And the scholar by the name of Watts, who wrote the Word Biblical Commentary on the book of Isaiah, pointed out that in the mind of the Hebrews, the relationship between Israel and the land was so bound up with each other, that for Israel to be removed from the land in captivity was to be considered dead. Now think about that, folks. That agrees perfectly with Hosea, when the Lord said in Hosea chapter 5, verse 15, "I will depart and I will return." Pardon me. My goodness gracious, I couldn't find the mute button. I apologize for that. "And I will return to my place until you repent and you return to me." That's Hosea chapter 5, verse 15. Well, in chapter 6, guess what Israel said? "The Lord has slain us with the word of his mouth." Well, these are living, breathing human beings saying that the Lord had killed them. They were dead. Just like a couple of centuries previously, just like a couple of centuries later, Judah would go into Babylonian captivity, and in Ezekiel chapter 37, they are depicted as dead and in the grave. But they're living, breathing human beings. They are dead men walking. And that's Hosea chapter 13. When Israel humbled himself before God, he was exalted. But when Ephraim sinned, he died. And yet they sinned more and more. So here are living human beings that were dead, covenantally dead, but physically alive. And so as the point that I'm making here is this interrelatedness between Israel and the land through that marriage relationship. To be divorced from Yahweh was to be dead. To be removed from the land was to be dead. And so now the Lord says, I will remarry you. Oh, and on the third day, he will raise us up and we will live in his sight. Hosea chapter 6, 1 and 2, the very verse that Paul quotes in 1 Corinthians 15, 1 through 3, to speak of the resurrection of Christ. Christ being the very expression and the symbol, the very identity of Israel. He is Israel in a very real sense. So, this language of your land shall be married must be viewed within a covenantal context that simply cannot be ignored or denied. And once we tap into that, we can start better understanding the language of death and resurrection. Because remember, as William was pointing out, all of this is the source of Paul's resurrection doctrine and his ideas, which he formulates in 1 Corinthians 15, 2 Corinthians chapter 5. Now remember, Hosea chapter 3, they would be without temple, without altar, without priesthood. And Paul in 2 Corinthians chapter 5 talks about the coming of the heavenly tabernacle, the new temple of God. Here's the restoration of Israel that had been promised long, long before. And of course, it goes back, all of this language goes back to Ezekiel 16, Ezekiel 23, and it's just beautiful, beautiful language. We're not going to take the time, to go through all of that, but it's all interrelated to this concept of the Messianic temple. That's what 2 Corinthians chapter 5 is all about. If the earthly house of this tabernacle be dissolved, we have a building of God, a house not made with hands. Folks, that's the Messianic temple. If ever we can ever identify it, that's the Messianic temple. I had somebody contact me just recently. And William, you well know, people want to make 2 Corinthians chapter 5 all about the biological body. And when I started showing this individual the temple imagery that is there, the Greek words that are used there, skene, skene, or however you pronounce that, and the Old Testament background to all of that, they were just astounded. They had never considered any of that. They had never considered the covenantal nature of that. And by the way, folks, I developed this somewhat in this new book that I mentioned, The Death of Adam, the Life of Christ, and I point out that the traditional views of individualism that see in 2 Corinthians chapter 5 a reference to individual bodily resurrection, they wind up with three bodies. And it's demanded by the text. And yet when you confront them with that reality, they're going, no, I don't believe in three bodies. Well, if you're going to take the individual body, then you've got to do that. But it just doesn't work in 2 Corinthians. Well, anyway, back to Isaiah. I was about to get on the soapbox there on 2 Corinthians 5. It's such a fantastic passage.
It's easy to do.
It is. It's really easy to do. And by the way, folks, if you don't have Tony Denton's book, Resurrection, Resolution, I think is the name of that book, Tony's got some really, really excellent linguistic studies in there. Now, a whole lot of his studies sprang from William's work that William did some years ago, but he builds on it and does a fantastic job. I do sell that book. Contact me if you don't have it, and if you'd like a copy of it. It's Tony Denton's book on the resurrection. Resurrection, Resolution, again, I believe is the name of it. But I'll tell you this, his work on 2 Corinthians chapter 5 and the tabernacle. And when Paul says, if this earthly house of this tabernacle be dissolved, from the Greek word kataluthe, and now William and I have seen this for years, to be honest about it. But when you focus in on the Greek word kataluthe, the traditional view of individualistic biological resurrection, as generally taught, absolutely is blown to smithereens when you see the meaning of kataluthe. I mean, it just doesn't work. Okay, Isaiah 62. For as a young man marries a virgin, so shall my sons marry thee, and as the bridegroom rejoices over the bride, so shall thy God rejoice over you. I have set watchmen upon the walls, O Jerusalem, which shall never hold their peace, day nor night. You that make mention of the Lord, keep not silent. Give him no rest until he establishes and until he makes Jerusalem a praise in the earth. Now, I want to make a point here from the language, from the linguistics of the text. In Isaiah chapter 62, verse 7, give him no rest until he establishes and until he makes Jerusalem a praise in the earth. The word establishes in the Septuagint is from the Greek word diorthosis. Diorthosis is used in Jeremiah chapter 16 and in several other messianic prophecies to speak of the ultimate messianic restoration of Israel and Jerusalem. Not the literal nationalistic restoration, the messianic restoration. Now, here's what's so absolutely fascinating about this. Now, keep in mind, Jeremiah 16, I believe it's Jeremiah 23 as well, uses diorthosis in the Septuagint. In Hebrews chapter 9, in Hebrews chapter 9, folks, make no mistake about it, it is an absolutely critical passage to understand. It's critical to understand because of what it has to say about the passage of Torah. It is critical because of what it has to say about the consummation of the atonement. It is critical to understand because of what it has to say about the parousia. It is critical because of what it has to say about the forgiveness of sin, and on and on and on. I mean, there are just several elements found in Hebrews chapter 9 that really shed incredible and irrefutable light on eschatology. Well, notice in Hebrews chapter 9 that the writer says that the old covenant stood in meats, drinks, divers washings, carnal ordinances that were imposed on them, quote, until the time of reformation. Well, the word reformation is diorthosis. So here is the New Testament writer speaking of the fulfillment of all of Israel's eschatological hopes, when all of her types and shadows would come to their fulfillment. And that means, in one word, in resurrection. And he says that all of those types, all of those shadows, all of those carnal ordinances were imposed until the time of reformation, diorthosis. Okay, well, the time of Israel's restoration is the time of the remarriage. That's Isaiah 62. Isaiah 62 is the time of the restoration of Jerusalem, the time of reformation. But wait a minute. The old covenant law would stand valid, imposed. And that's the Greek word epikaimen, epikaimenon, I think, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Epikaimenon. But it imposed, valid, binding, until the time of Reformation, until the time of the wedding, the restoration of Israel, the time of the Messianic temple. Now, folks, I hope you're beginning to see a train coming. Because the time of Reformation is the time of the end of Torah. It's not the end of the Christian age. Okay? Now, let's talk about the wedding for just a moment, because remember, Isaiah chapter 62 is the time of the Reformation. That time of Reformation is the time of the wedding of Yahweh. Oh, wait. The time of the wedding is the time of the new covenant. The time of the new covenant is the time of the Messianic temple. All of these are bundled up to be fulfilled, to be realized at the time of Reformation. Remember, this is critical, that all of those old covenant ordinances were to be imposed until the time of Reformation. But let me reiterate, at the risk of being redundant, the time of Reformation is the time of the remarriage. So the question has to be asked, William, and you tell me if it's a fair and legitimate question, therefore. If the law of Moses ended at the cross, then doesn't that demand that the time of Reformation arrived at the cross?
That would have to be the case.
Okay.
Which really complicates it when you look at the parallels to it, which I know you'll get to the synonyms for the term eventually, but that really makes an interesting situation. But go ahead.
Well, if the time of Reformation arrived at the cross, then that must mean that the wedding, the remarriage of God with Israel, happened at the cross. Because remember, the old covenant would be imposed, valid and binding, until the time of the Reformation. But the time of the Reformation is the time of the wedding. Oh, wait a minute. Here we got a real interesting concept here. In Revelation chapter 19, at the time of the destruction of the city called Babylon, the cry of victory is given. Let us rejoice and be glad, for the time of the wedding has come. What? Whose wedding is this? This is Israel's wedding. This is the fulfillment of Hosea. So if the wedding doesn't arrive until the destruction of Babylon, and folks, if you have any questions about who Babylon was, all you got to do is read Revelation chapter 11, verse 8. It's the city where the Lord was slain. You know, William, I think it's absolutely fascinating. I'm sure you've seen some of the discussion on Facebook over the last few days. William Vincent, who says he used to be a full preterist, said he once took the early date of the book of Revelation, but now he's beginning to second guess that. And Sam Frost chimed in and said he's second guessing that as well. And, it's a legitimate debate whether or not the book of Revelation was written early or late. Well, I'm sorry, I don't even really consider that a legitimate discussion. I mean,
you know what, Don? On that particular note, Roy Runyon had posted an excerpt from The Early Days of Christianity by F.W. Farrar. And I had intended to copy it and didn't get it, so I sent him a note this afternoon. And I actually have a copy of the book. I've got an old copy that I bought it on eBay, and I think they shipped it to me from Australia. It looks like they dug it up from somewhere, but nevertheless, I mean, I've got a copy of it. And in that particular book, on page 431, this is interesting, and I like to just read this, just a couple of lines from it. He says, no one is more competent to speak of the character and value of these different schools of interpretation than Dean Farrar of the Church of England, an eminent scholar and a sincere investigator, who says in his Early Days of Christianity, page 431, the futurist school has always been numerically small and at present day be said to be non-existent. The school of historical interpreters was founded by the abbot Joachim earlier in the 13th century and was especially flourishing in the first 50 years of the present century. And then he goes on to note a list of scholars who took the preterist view. And then, let's see, there's one other line here that I'd like to get. And, of course, you know, even responding to the comment about the Spanish Jesuit Alcazar, who they claim was the founder of the preterist school, he actually says, no, the real founder of the preterist school was the Apostle John. And then he quotes some of the statements and makes some eminent comments about it. So I thought it was very interesting. I was going to try to post that back. But it's quite an array of you know, reputable scholars, and the very statement that says, you know, the futurist view was virtually non-existent is just priceless.
Well, F.W. Farrar has been one of my favorite authors for many years. I've collected numerous ones of his books. And, pardon me, in that very same book, The Early Days of Christianity, F.W. Farrar, in discussing the dating of the book of Revelation, and this is a rough paraphrase, but I can get the quote for those who might be interested. F.W. Farrar makes the comment that no scholar worth his salt would dare question or challenge the early dating of the book of Revelation. Now, that was written in 1887, 18-something along that line, certainly in the 19th century. And so here was a man that was considered by many to be one of the preeminent scholars of his day, saying that no scholar worth his salt, no scholar to be considered a scholar, would dare question or challenge the idea of the early dating of the book of Revelation. And yet people today say, oh, well, everybody knows the book of Revelation was written at the late date. And so, you know, people who
1882.
1882, there you go. It actually went through a couple of different revisions and different editions of it. But I've had my copy of F.W. Farrar probably for 20 or 25 years. It's just, when I started reading some quotes from that scholar, I just decided I had to have a copy. I got my copy from a bookstore in Franklin, Tennessee. I used to get a lot of books from those people. They handled rare, unusual, scholarly books, and I don't even remember now how I stumbled onto them, but nonetheless, I got the book, and I mean, I consumed it because it is just absolutely chock full of wonderful quotes and wonderful information. He was a really, really fantastic scholar.
Absolutely. And I've had this book about 10 years. It just wasn't in good shape when I got it, but I mean, it's readable, and that's all I need. Because it's it's very good, and like you said, he's got some great quotes in it.
Yeah. So anyway, all of that aside, I found it interesting, this discussion on on Facebook, and so I have asked William Benson, and I have asked Sam Frost over the last, not just in this recent discussion, But over the last couple of months, I have asked Sam Frost especially to please identify Babylon of Revelation, the harlot city, the city where the Lord was slain. I have asked him repeatedly to answer that question. And Sam Frost will not answer the question. You know, if you are a futurist and if you believe your position is true, why do you refuse to answer those questions? It is exactly like others on Facebook that when you ask them very simple questions. I have asked on Facebook this morning, I asked 3 or 4 different people, including William Vincent, Sam Frost, Jeff Cunningham. I asked them no less than 3 times. What is the return of the Lord? In Luke chapter 19, 11 and following, the nobleman went into a far country there to receive a kingdom. Having received the kingdom, or being in the far country, his citizens sent an embassage after him, saying, "We will not have this man to rule over us." And I asked the question, who are the citizens who said, "We will not have this man rule over us"? What is the return of the king to destroy those citizens who said or who refused his reign? Now, they have refused to answer that. I asked this question of Jeff Cunningham 4 times. No answer. Absolutely refuses to answer. And so, you know, folks, you got to ask yourself a question. I mean, if you have the truth in regard to these issues, why is it so difficult to answer these questions? Why won't you answer the question? Well, to answer those questions is to defeat yourself. To answer the question, who is Babylon, is to completely falsify your futurist eschatology. That's why these men will not go on record on Facebook and say, "I believe that Babylon is Old Covenant Jerusalem," or "I believe that Babylon is Old Covenant Rome." "I believe that Babylon is, New York City," or whoever. Or "I believe that Babylon is a corrupt religious system that will exist in the end time." You know, shake a bush or do something. Give us an answer. But these men absolutely refuse to do so. But to return to the point, the time of Reformation is the time of the restoration of Israel. The time of the restoration of Israel is the time of the New Covenant. It is the time of the Messianic Temple. It is the time of the wedding. The wedding is the time of the destruction of Babylon, which is the city where the Lord was slain. You know what that means, folks? That means that the Messianic Temple had to be constructed, finished, finalized, glorified by the time of the destruction of the Old Covenant Temple, which is precisely what we find. That's the idea in Hebrews chapter 9. The Old Covenant Temple with its cultus, with its priesthood, with its sacrifices, with its ordinances would be imposed until the time of Reformation. At the time of Reformation, man could enter into the most holy place, the presence of God, which is what Revelation teaches, that at the judgment of Babylon, man could enter the most holy place, the Messianic Temple, the presence of God. And with that, folks, we are out of time. Thank you so much for joining us here on Two Guys and a Bible on Fulfilled Radio, a voice you can trust. William, with that, I'm going to say good night, and God bless everyone. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for joining the Two Guys and a Bible radio broadcast. On behalf of Dunn Preston and myself, we'd like to say have a very pleasant day, and may God bless. Until next time, we'll see you on Fulfill Radio, a voice you can trust.